That brings us on, I guess, the next section of the interview, and that's talking about kind of, again, the zoomed out picture. At Pod Point, we are really, majority of our time is focused on cars and vans, the electrification of cars and vans, and providing charging infrastructure for that. Clearly, your role at Arrival and your perspective in general is more holistic. So you've talked about urban centres, public transport, to some extent, reading your Medium recently, talking about active travel, etc. Clearly, that's something that really engages you. You know, what's the optimal way to move people around the cities, etc.
Yeah, completely. And I think, back in probably 2015, we really started to talk about autonomous vehicles. Autonomous, connected, electric and shared vehicles, as this is the direction that the mobility industry is going in. And it used to drive me absolutely mad, because we talk about autonomous vehicles and think, oh, well, if we're not driving, we can sit back and relax and work more, or eat a sandwich or something like that. I think, no, that's so boring. That means that we will not consider the system as a whole. If you have an autonomous vehicle on your driveway, there becomes no incentive to use public transportation or to walk anywhere. And possibly then we end up with loads more vehicles on the road. And what autonomy presents us, and that's just sticking with that example, is a way to think about, well, how do these different systems interact, and what are the perfect use cases for autonomous vehicles? And that to me is much more interesting. And in the same sense with electric vehicles, we have to think about it in that holistic way, because if we don't, we'll see that people who are, maybe have higher income individuals are able to transition to electric vehicles first, meaning that higher income neighbourhoods, and it's not always as high income neighbourhood, low income neighbourhood, but certainly high income neighbourhoods will experience better air quality more quickly. The charging infrastructure will follow that kind of critical mass of electric vehicles. And suddenly in lower income neighbourhoods, which we know already have poorer air quality, will have much worse air quality comparatively. So thinking about it in terms of transportation equity and the whole system, and bringing up the whole system to a new standard, I think becomes a much, much more interesting and complicated but interesting challenge.
Yeah, I certainly agree. We often talk about the issue with a two-tier society. We have the luxury of, I guess, attacking the low-hanging fruit of the early adopters, but they do tend to be more affluent. And there is a concern about how we move to a full adoption of electric vehicles. So we see that in our world, but I guess also with the public transport, there's a sustainable use of resources argument. Shared mobility is going to be a lot more sustainable than individual car ownership.
Yeah, exactly. And when you think of kind of that shared set of resources, and there are some cities doing some amazing stuff. I mean, Manchester is a perfect example of thinking, how can they share buses between different kind of operators? And if I try and explain it, I'll definitely won't do it justice and will get it wrong, but worth looking up. And I think it is just a more sensible way to consider the system. But equally, if we are talking about public transportation, shared mobility, etc., all the connecting glue has to be considered as well. So how do you walk to the bus? And I found this particularly in my last role at Arrival, a shocking statistic that in the US, 61% of roads don't have a sidewalk on them. And that's urban roads, not motorways. So you think, well, how can people get the bus if you can't walk there or cycle there, and those sorts of things? So then through thinking about shared mobility and shared assets, it forces the world of urban planning and urban development and mobility to come together to think about, all the different nodes in the system.
Yeah, the US is particularly challenged with that, because they've literally built the cities and infrastructure around the car. The lack of footpaths or sidewalks, as they say, is quite apparent if you spend much time there.